The Business Innovation Grant, I made a post, or actually I made a whole channel in Slack, and I realize right now I didn't put that in this slide, so I will update it. But there's a ConnectAll Business Innovation channel in Slack that has way more detail than this. But I'm going to give you guys an overview, and then there's just a couple of discussion topics that I just kind of want to go through, looking for feedback, because this could, well, you know, this is kind of big. So ConnectAll itself is a New York initiative that's investing over $1 billion in public investment to connect New Yorkers to the internet. Its focus is on sort of infrastructure, community organizing, public-private partnerships, with the idea of, again, bringing affordable internet to New Yorkers. On the right of this slide, over there, my left, it's from their website, right? You can go to broadband.ny.gov and learn all about ConnectAll. There are a ton of different things, and it is statewide. It's not just New York City. The Business Innovation Grant, which we have applied for, is a subset of that, and it was seeking to award innovative, collaborative, and unique business structures that prioritize connectivity in low-income or rural communities. There were a number of people that won this award. We worked with, if you know Harper Zacharias, who has, we actually, interestingly enough, got another grant from ConnectAll last year for a much smaller amount of money to fund a fundraiser, essentially someone to help us write grants. So Harper wrote most of this grant, as well as with Dave Seliger, who is the Chief Digital Equity Officer of HPD, so Housing and Public
Preservation and Development.
Housing Preservation and Development. So essentially they administer a lot of New York City properties, a lot of housing complexes and things like that. So we applied for $890,000 as a part of the program, and we were notified about a month ago that we won it, which is very exciting. It's not in the slides, but just for reference, that's about 2 years of our operating revenue, meaning the money that we raise from our members. And we pretty much keep a balanced budget, so it's about 2 years of what we spend as well. So it's a really, really big initiative. It's also a 2-year grant period, interestingly enough, so it almost perfectly matches exactly what we spend in any given year. So if you were to think about it in that effect, we essentially are doubling our operations with a grant like this in real time. The grant structure is as follows, right? So we'll partner with HPD through Dave to identify some priority neighborhoods to collaborate with developers and deploy NYC Mesh to existing buildings. This is focused on existing buildings primarily that have HPD requirements, right, or low-income requirements, almost all retrofit, right? So it's a little bit different than our current model where most of our growth happens organically, right? It's meant to focus on, I'm hoping, buildings with like 10 to 40 apartments, because they're just much easier to do faster versus like a 300-person building, right? Another Grand Street is fantastic and it is on mission, but it's a 2 or 3 year project by itself. So in our grant, we specify 533 units. I don't know why, I actually don't know how we got to that number, in 14 or more buildings. We could probably do a new build if the timing works, right, if the developers are ready. But again, new builds, like Brian manages most of our building intake as well as Leiden does some of it as well. Brian tends to take the bigger ones and then Leiden tends to handle a lot of the smaller buildings. And these are usually 2 to 3 year projects, right? So many of the requests that we get for quotes and for estimates of what it would cost us to deploy NYC Mesh to a new build is before they've even broken ground, right? So we will usually get a set of architect drawings and they'll ask us to make an estimate. So in this specific case, mostly to keep us within the 2 year pilot, we're focusing on retrofits. Dave thankfully has a long list of buildings that he thinks are good candidates, as well as he's already done a lot of the legwork for us of identifying what could be good hubs, which would be fantastic. His focus is mostly in Brownsville and East New York, but the grant itself is not limited to only those areas. So the good thing is we already kind of have a pipeline of buildings that are coming in like this, right? So they just need to meet certain requirements for us to apply this funding for it. Dave and the New York Public Libraries have a neighborhood tech help set of community organizations that can help do outreach and onboarding, which I think would be fantastic because it is an area that is difficult for us. We actually, by the way, because I know a number of you are on the outreach team, we're doing a way better job than we did even 6 months ago on that because we have a lot of volunteers who really want to do it, but it is very time consuming, right? So for us, like, I think that this model of us helping train others of how to talk about Mesh and how to get people interested in it and how to drive signups is a good model because they can be much more responsive to the residents. And in most cases, they know the residents better than we do. Rob and I are helping with New York Presbyterian, and we're doing a very, very similar model there, right? Where we are, of course, doing the labor of installing the apartments, but they're doing the sort of whipping of the residents to get them interested and signed up and coordinated so that we can get them onto the network. So we'd really like to do something very similar to that. The payments will come from ConnectAll in a milestone-based fashion. And there's details in Slack of what those looks like. And our responsibility is for 10% matching on that, so $89,000. So again, going back to those same numbers that I mentioned before, that's only about 20% of our operating revenue to commit to this over 2 years. So I personally feel like this is not very risky for us. And it has a ton of upside, both from just the dollar amount we're going to get it, but also to be able to just, provide this service to the people who probably need it the most. The key components of it, so there's a full-time program coordinator or project manager to support the grant-specific build-outs and overall Mesh operational improvements. So the good thing is that role doesn't only have to focus on this grant or or just onboarding buildings, because if we're going to do this, we also need to think about how do we support these people, right? If we hook up 533 more units, we're growing by probably 25%, if not more, in total installs. And again, some of these people are going to be engaged in a different way. These are not going to be people who are joining necessarily who may not match those same statistics we just saw of 85% mission, right? These might just be people who just need internet, or their building told them, here is your internet, right? So how do we support them? As well as just infrastructural improvements, right? As we expand further out into further neighborhoods, that means that we have to do the things that some volunteers like, which is better antennas, more thought in, what buildings are going to work out, where the hub's going to be, who is going to represent them locally. All of that sort of technical work needs to be coordinated. And again, it's a lot of work for volunteers, even the ones that are really interested in. So that full-time coordinator could really do a whole lot for the Mesh. We also have some money set aside for probably contractor and 1099 based roles, for outreach, for revenue development, and for just general installation labor. The installation labor is probably already covered because we already have a couple of people who do contracted installation labor, or it could be if we go to a building that's got like 50 units and it's a little more complex, we may just come to the decision of like, let's just kick it to 700 Nano or a subcontractor and let them do the work, and we just do the rooftop, right? We've done that in a number of other medium-sized, like 50 to 150 type size buildings where, I don't know about you guys, but like I'm not gonna go wire up 150 apartments, right? It's just too much work. Right, we just don't, like volunteers don't have time for that, right? So part of the funding would pay for a lot of that, which I think is really helpful. And then there's a bunch of other numbers up there for different things. There's fiber leases, there's storage, there's software, there's maintenance, there's a number of other expenses. Again, we haven't had final discussions with them of exactly how accurate these have to be from our proposal. I think that there's going to be some flexibility on it as long as we're achieving the goal, which is hooking up those additional buildings, right? It can't be a total slush fund, but whether we need to spend exactly $13,500 on a lease is an open question for them, right? I personally think that the fiber leases is a big opportunity for us, especially if we're pushing deeper and deeper into Brooklyn. The survey thing, I'm actually really happy that happened right before this, because Rain reliability and speed is something that people are asking for. We are up against Verizon and these other commercial ISPs that are telling users that you need gigabit internet for 5 people to stream Netflix, right? And whether it's accurate or not, it's just about the loudest voice in the room, right? So I'm not saying that we need to give gigabit to everybody who's on the mesh, because that would cost us an absolute fortune and be really, really difficult to maintain. However, I think that we do need to think about how do we, especially that bottom 25% of people that get 25 megabit, which probably isn't good enough if they have 2 or 3 people that are working in the day on Zoom or trying to watch a 4K video, how do we address some of that, right? And as we move into buildings especially, right, where we're providing internet to an entire building, we need to seriously think about how do we make sure that that's a good experience for them, both from a rain perspective as well as from a performance perspective. So a couple different ways to do that, right? We can spend a lot of money on antennas, we can spend a lot of money on fiber, but you know, I think this gives us a good opportunity to do that without a huge risk to the mesh. That's always, I think, what's kept us from doing. I would love to put fiber in 25 hubs that we've got, but we can't afford it. Right? We can't afford $50,000 a month in fiber leases. That would eat up all of our revenue, and we'd have nothing left for, well, anything, right? And we could run out of money. That's about it. I have a couple of areas here for discussion points, and I think that that's where I'd like to just get some more feedback. From a next steps perspective, I am waiting. They told me this week we're supposed to get the final documentation from their board of finalizing, and then we have to accept it. So our board does still technically need to vote on this. We'll need to form a hiring committee for the paid roles, especially the full-time role. We need to develop JDs and conduct interviews. We will have to select those people, and then, in my opinion, they should be driving, developing detailed planning and templates and whatnot for developer coordination and deployment. And then we have to do the more fun parts, which is the last 2, which is planning and building the network extension infrastructure and then scaling up and continuing deployments. The other thing I'd add here is I think that it's important that we be thoughtful in how we do this, because it could be a significant growth in the mesh, which necessarily will require some more effort from volunteers, right? And burnout is something that we have to manage very, very closely. So that's why I'm actually very happy about the fact that there's quite a bit of allocation in this towards people being paid to do this stuff, because there's some stuff that people just don't want to do, right? If I asked you to run fiber, 2 days a week for the next 6 months as a volunteer, you're probably just going to stop showing up, right? Even if you like running fiber, you probably just get sick of it, because now it starts feeling like a job, right? If you have to, again, it's a grant with requirements, so I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of reports and metrics that we have to provide, and it's just not very fun, right? There's a number of things that even people on the board don't want to do because they're just not interesting or fun, right? And as volunteers, it's important that we keep sight of that, right? It's important that our board keeps sight of it, and it's important when we develop the approach to this or finalize the approach to this that we don't rely too heavily on volunteers to do things that maybe they're just not interested in, right? So building out hubs, great, let's do that. Wiring up 20 buildings in a year, maybe that's an opportunity for us to outsource or subcontract or something like that, so that our folks can focus on the things that they like to do. So that's the grant. I put a bunch of discussion points here, and I'm going to go in maybe not the same exact order. So for one, so Dave wants to do, their focus is a lot on Brownsville and East New York, which means that we need to upgrade Saratoga. I've already made a post about this. I think that we need to do it anyway, because that site is, when did Saratoga go up? Like 2019?
Oh, before my time.
Yeah.
2018?
Yeah. Saratoga's in need of some love. I've put some stuff in Slack on it. I would love help. I'm happy to lead, especially a lot of the ordering and stuff, but I do have a 5-month-old, so my time is slightly limited. But I think that we can do that, and it's just a good fall project, right? Lots of people like getting up there. You know, it's a rooftop project. People will enjoy that. We should think about where else they could be useful to make investments from a rain perspective, from thinking about like where a fiber lease could be deployed. There are some buildings, especially in some of the other discussions we've had with other organizations, because we're going to post this on YouTube and nothing is committed, that may have some Queens connections. I think that that could be a really, really good place to do some investment. If we can identify a tall building in Queens to become a hub, I think that there's a great opportunity to do fiber there or in some other parts of Brooklyn. Even as we look down towards Flatbush or further out east, again, the further we get from where our fiber is, the less reliable this becomes by design. On the HPD, New York Public Libraries collaboration, primarily, what I'm looking for is who wants to be sort of part of the, I don't want to use corporate terms, but sort of an operating committee or a group of people that sort of meets fairly consistently to talk through like how we are going to execute this. Because I don't, for one, like Dave is the one guy at HPD that we communicate with consistently, but he has a full-time job. He doesn't have time to come on Slack and engage with us the way that we engage with each other. So we will need to sort of collect some of those responses and then have a more typical working relationship with them, which means probably meetings and emails, which we don't like doing. We like just going on Slack and posting our feelings. So we'll need a little bit of assistance with that just from a collaboration perspective. And I'm not saying that we need a whole group of people taking minutes, but just whoever wants to be a part of working with them on how we want to go through that. I think that the board can mostly handle from a contracting perspective, especially with the public libraries. There may be some opportunities for pass-through contracts to simplify our contracting with individual developers via NYPL. And I'm happy to own that or have, with the board, we can work through those things. The full-time role. So we talked about this at Mesh Night, I want to say like 3-4 weeks ago. But like, what else do you guys think would be good for that? If we take the obvious that they're going to be responsible for engaging with the developers, scoping out the buildings, making the plans, probably doing some of the ordering of the equipment that we would need. And then the outreach coordinator would be doing sort of like making materials to be a part of that. What else do we think that would be good for this person to do that isn't something that volunteers want to do, first of all? And two is like where we're not stepping on other volunteers' toes. Because there's some volunteers that like doing things that other people don't like to do. There's some people that like doing support. Most people don't like doing support here, and that's okay. You're not getting paid to do it, so no one can blame you for it. I'm trying to like think about how we balance that where we don't become, there's already been some comments in Slack about like changing the nature of the mesh or the mission of the mesh if we hire someone, because we've always not been, we haven't had employees, so to speak, but I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one important role that this person could play is just like volunteer development, essentially. Saying like recruiting new volunteers, helping volunteers skill up in areas where they want to like develop their, their skill in something but don't feel confident doing it, like taking those people along in their like day-to-day responsibilities. As well as like keeping an eye on making sure that volunteers aren't feeling burnt out and like providing support where that's needed, not in terms of like helping with the like technical side of things, but just literally in terms of like culture. I think that is a really important role this person can play, because I think a lot of that is just like a lot of that work isn't getting done, and I think that's part of why there has been a decent amount of churn in terms of volunteers.
Any responses? Because I know that like Julian's doing some of that in their role as a Vista Fellow, but perhaps it could be better. I also I think I fundamentally agree with you. I do worry about the time commitment, right? Is if it becomes it's not something that person should be doing every day, right? Volunteer, or individual volunteers being like, Daniel, what can I go do? Or Sion, or whoever it is that is that person, right? Of like, what can I do today, right? That just becomes a traffic cop.
Oh yeah.
Right. Right. John, give me a job to do today. You know what I mean? That doesn't sound fun at all.
Yeah. No.
And so I think that perhaps from a more strategic aspect of how do we engage volunteers and how do we make them feel more valued, I do think that systems and processes is a good focus for a role like this, in that I think that we have volunteers that want to do work, and our biggest gap is experienced volunteers who have been burnt out, right, to some extent, some of them, and then just the coordination of all of that effort, right? It doesn't feel like we have a gap in people who are interested in helping. It does feel like we have a gap in people who are interested in helping, and have enough knowledge or impetus to just go do it, right? Especially in our Leiden's favorite term, duocracy here, where if you see something that needs to get done, you go do it, right? And that's difficult for a lot of people to really take into account. You have to be a certain personality type to be comfortable with that. And if you're not, then you really do need someone to kind of take you by the shoulder and be like, nope, come on, we're going to this hub and we're going to take that antenna down and we're going to replace it with this. And be like, well, but no one decided. It's like, well, it needs to get done, right? And some people are just more well-equipped for that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we're never going to get everybody.
No, of course not.
So losing some number of people is there, but developing those processes around how do we funnel people into work? How do we make sure they're not getting burnt out? I think that could be really important work to make sure that this all stays sustainable as we grow.
Right, right. Even tactically, I was thinking about this the other night, Brian has mentioned a couple of times of nobody uses the Mesh calendar anymore. And there's probably a couple of reasons for it, but it is at the base of it, it is actually a good tool. It's just that we don't have a good process for maintaining it. No one maintains it except for one person. So I'm just, if anybody is a newer volunteer in here, how do you find out about stuff?
Just a little Slack.
Right. Or you come to a Mesh night, right? But our Slack can be quite overwhelming.
Well, every single channel.
Right?
30,000 channels.
And then one after you.
And we're not going to capture all this in YouTube, and it's fine.
I think so from the preliminary conversations we've had in the Mesh room and about this, I've thought about it some more. I think it's very exciting, contrary to some maybe fear that it's going to supplant or replace some of the volunteer labor. I think the coordination is key. I almost see that in terms of the general operations of coordinating volunteers, it's going to be more of saying, we're not taking away any agency from folks, because if a volunteer really wanted to develop a hub, let's say HPD said, yo, I got this building in East New York, it's going up, it's going to be 20 stories, it's going to be, right? That doesn't mean that a volunteer can't come in and do the plan. But the truth of the matter is the current way this works is already dysfunctional, so it's not like right now volunteers are rushing to lead projects, because right now we're already getting buildings. Oh, I was just emailed about this co-op in somewhere. Who's going to lead the project, right? It's already already the processes or the lack of processes is leading for volunteers to feel like, well, we have no say in how this contractor quote was submitted. Now you want me to go spend the next 40 hours of this week, irrespective of any job, to actually plan out how to do that build. So in terms of this, and that's for a number of reasons. So I think it's going to be helpful to have a person who is maybe more willing to be on the ground with volunteers, put together some of the plans, build some of the plans, and just vibe out as as a building gets selected through ConnectAll, figure out like, okay, how much do volunteers want to participate? So instead of being, oh, we have a commitment that we can't fill, at least we can plan ahead and say, oh, it seems like this project has a lot of volunteers who are biting and want to take it on. This project, it seems that we're going to have to recruit a little bit more technical help.
And that's kind of how I see, when I say systems and processes, because some people also get very concerned when you even mention systems and processes, especially an organization like ours, right? Where it's like, we don't have a lot of systems and processes. And what I don't mean is turning the mesh into a corporation or into a factory that creates internet for people, right? When I talk about systems and processes, I talk about, what I'm thinking of is like, experienced people and even new people have come up with some really clever and unique ways or just great approaches to do things. And right now, you have to either be aware of that it was done, or you have to search through Slack, or you have to just find the great bomb that was built to find all those things out, right? Like if I want to go build a hub, I know that I got to probably talk to John, and I got to talk to Rob, and I got to talk to one or two other people, because like they have all this knowledge. And that's not an indictment of them. They don't have time, and maybe they just don't want to write 35 documents about how to build a good hub, right? That to me is the process that I'm talking about of like, let's extract some of that good institutional knowledge and not formalize it, but just document it, right? And the thing is, the other thing is like, that doesn't have to be the way that you do it, right? But at least we have some kind of template, right? I think that there's some concern that like it becomes, well, this is how you have to do a building of this size, and then this is how you're going to have to do a hub. And I don't think that we have to do that at all. But if someone who is newer and maybe hasn't done a hub before, and they're like, oh, Jesus Christ, where do I start? Right? And that's really difficult. It's really, I'm still scared of doing a giant hub because I don't know. I have to ping 5 other people and go extract from other projects I know of. But if you had this sort of, you know, here's a subset of the wiki, right? And here's a link to a couple of good bombs. And by the way, here's some equipment that we consistently use that we know works really well. I mean, you already have, that's half the battle. You know what I mean?
And I want to see how this lands among people. So like, give me feedback on this. But from what you're saying, a simple division that I'm seeing is this full-time project manager should solely be over buildings that come through the ConnectAll grant. Because that's the thing. All right, so I'm going to throw this out. I already got one strong reaction. I like that. But like, because I'm thinking like those aren't the only projects we'll have with NYC Mesh. So I feel like as projects come up organically, let that stay within the volunteer landscape. But if within a 6-month period, there are 3 buildings we get that are clearly through this channel, I think that's the project manager that is, to your point, having a process and coordination around, even if it's putting out a call on Slack, but actually then recruiting people, like having them a part of a project plan. But that's the thing, each building under the ConnectAll should be its own small project that project manager is then owning. I'm being a little strong in my language because I just want to see initial reactions, but how is that landing for folks? I'll take it to Ash since they have a strong no, but that's an easy division of labor.
To me, I think that they could assist with lots of large buildings, even if it doesn't fall under ConnectAll, right?
Yeah, we treat this like Sean, where like it's there. They gotta make sure that this is getting done, and then the time they have left over gets dedicated
I think
to
that's
other
where that
projects.
strays into the we're tapping this first for anything and everything.
Well,
That's why I think
yeah.
Limits.
if it's through the ConnectAll grant, it's the project manager. If not, then not.
Well, so I'm not saying it should be the default. However, this has been, and this is maybe a broader topic, this has been a bit of an organizational, spiritual argument for the last, at least since I've joined the Mesh, of this division of like, what I call like organic installs, which means I went to the website, I signed up, I live in a brownstone or a 10-story building or a 6-story walk-up or whatever it might be, versus the Mesh signed a contract with the developer for 50 or 100 or 150 units, right? And it's been quite painful, right? And there's been a lot of difficult conversations and fights about should we be doing that, number one, and two is should we be depending on volunteers to do it? And my personal thinking has shifted on the first part of it, which is should we be doing it, because it's a great revenue stream, which allows us to do lots of other things, like provide genuinely free internet to some people, right, who genuinely need it, from the revenue that we get from some of those. But the second one, I haven't changed a lot of my approach of it, where like I don't think that we should be asking volunteers to lead a 200-member building install unless they genuinely want to do it, right? So to me, it's as much overflow as anything else. If someone raises their hand right now and says, I want to do the next Olmsted, by all means, please do, right? Like, that would be great. Awesome, you're going to learn a ton, I promise, right? You're going to work super hard. But if you don't want to do it, and it's good for the mesh, and the board / the person who's running it works with the project manager to say, do we have the capacity to do this over the next X number of years, and does it make sense financially, then that's something that role could support.
Yeah.
Do you have
Could do this one too.
Hello?
I don't like meetings, but, yeah.
Oh, it goes to there. To the division of labor point, and Sian, you had that division. I was envisioning a division like, okay, a building comes through the ConnectAll Grant. It's an HPD building. Maybe it's big, and this project manager is gonna, coordinate contractors running fiber through the whole building, but then maybe the division of labor to the volunteers is like, well, we now have access to the roof of that building, and that roof of that building allows us to expand the mesh to elsewhere. So like volunteers can coordinate how we're gonna build out a hub on the roof, and then the ConnectAll Grant project manager is like handling the building itself.
Yeah.
That goes to that division of labor. I think you're right. Setting up the units in that building is through the ConnectAll Grant. If we're saying we just want that roof space to upgrade the node or to upgrade the hub for other nodes nearby, that goes to the regular work that would have come up anyway. I think that example, though, is a perfect example of this sort of model of division of labor. I think that's, you're saying what I'm saying.
But then what if a volunteer comes along and says, I'm really passionate about running fiber conduit in a building?
I say they can, but that would be that, because this goes back, like, who's the person, like, either owning that or just coordination, even if it's just basic email. I think that volunteer can still do that, and maybe that volunteer in this case is taking more of a co-lead with the project manager. But like, that's the thing, at the end of the day, who's owning something? Like, when something breaks, who is the person owning? I think it should be the project manager for HPD.
For his ConnectAll Grant affiliated building.
I mean, I'll be honest, my opinion is just that, like, the project manager should take up what the volunteers don't want to do on that project. And like, if we find volunteers who genuinely want to take up everything in a building, then they should step back and let that person lead. But I'm assuming that's not going to happen for most large buildings. And so they take the lead on all of that stuff. And then, whatever volunteers do want to do within that building then gets done by the volunteers.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know, my other 2 cents on like kind of division of labor as well is, having that project manager that can be responsible for, like, because a lot of what we have, like how you see overall mesh is you'll end up with kind of people that are kind of keeping tabs on a certain neighborhood or a certain building or something like that, where it's like, hey, what's going on in this building? Yeah, go message, if you have any questions, go message that person that kind of built it. So yeah, the project manager being someone who can kind of keep tabs on that stuff and document that stuff, even if they're not the ones doing the work, they're like, great, we have 6 volunteers that are in the server room building the rack. The project coordinator is standing behind them with a laptop taking notes of like, okay, what's plugged into which port? Because that's the kind of grunge work that gets missed on a lot of these big projects. And, that's the kind of thing that like this person can do.
Yeah, if I may, I 100% agree with both Ash and Leiden, especially both one in like sort of that, even though the funding is only for 2 years, we should be looking, this is a grant, right? And we can extract a lot more labor. I hate to say it that way, but we can, yeah, sorry. Yes, sorry, down with the bourgeoisie, right? But I would say that we can gain a lot from this in terms of learning how to build up organizational capacity and say, like, if this person, and to Leiden's point, to your point, to finish Ash's point, right? That I agree that they should be able to do a little bit more than just to connect all buildings, especially because we have a number of buildings, which I keep saying, that are online right now that sort of currently exceed what volunteers are willing to do and what the residents of those buildings deserve. Because I'm sure that if, as time goes on, more of those buildings will be responding to the survey and say, this is not the support I expect from a ISP, because we don't operate like one. And to Leiden's point, in terms of being on the ground, I mean, I think the biggest caveat to having the project manager being very on the ground is that it's going to narrow your pool, because it's going to be harder to find someone who's good at the project management and is good at the technical components of actually being on the ground at every site. But I also agree that it's important because they're not going to have a clear understanding of resource allocation as it pertains to mesh if they don't have that on the ground experience of doing a mesh install.
If I can just, if I can jump for a second. I know, go ahead.
Please go.
Well, what I was just gonna say is the thing that you highlighted there that I think is important here is just what we don't have that's really clear is getting things built versus maintaining things in perpetuity. And I think maintaining something in perpetuity is, in my anecdotal experience, one of the larger things that drives core volunteers away from being engaged for a longer amount of time. Because what you have is, I really worked on getting this particular hub built, but now people are asking to get installed there and like, I don't have the time anymore. And I want to, or like now we got to, the super is emailing because the duct fell off or the whatever, but how's this my problem? I just helped get the thing built, But now, that's pretty serious. But that's kind of different from saying how do we build A versus how do we build B. It's how does something graduate into different stages in its existence, and that's again right to the support and all that other question of like something as it moves along in its chain, support looks different. Where who built this? What's nice is that our installs are mostly cookie cutter, but the big buildings are less so, right? And so, why was it set up this way? Is there a UPS on the roof? What does the UPS look like? Oh boy, right? Like but maintaining documentation, for example, maintaining sort of maintenance standards and things like that is like, I think all those things are in there. I don't have, all the answers here.
I'll make a comment real quick. This is something I've been wanting to say as a response to something Matt said a while ago, but I think, yes. One of the responsibilities they could have is after every hub, this is something I proposed a while ago and it didn't go anywhere, is do an after action report. Just say this is what happened, this is the equipment we used. So instead of having to compile 30 documents on how you build a hub, you just have a centralized documentation of every single hub build that we've ever done, and you can look and see how previous hub builds have solved challenges, and have that both as a resource for if you're going in 2 years later and want to know what's going on in a building, but also if you're building a new building, you can look at that instead of having to ping a million different people.
My thought with this, and I hate to feel like a hammer looking for a nail, but would be some custom software that could conform to whatever ontology we want to put together that would be for Mesh to put in tasks, to put in documentation about a site, to put in all of the, sort of like a project management CRM. I hate to use corporate CRM word as well, but just custom software that is molded to Mesh tasks and information and locations of hubs, kind of connecting to Mesh DB as well. And I'd be willing to lead that up and have a pilot in 2 weeks, maybe not this upcoming Tuesday, but the Tuesday after, I could have something put together.
Love that idea. The only one I'd be against is the task side of it, because, and the reason I mention that is because I've been accused of being a little too corporate with the mesh before, and while I don't agree necessarily with the sentiment, and the reason I say that is because I don't, one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to be on the board is because I want to influence the fact that I don't want this to feel like a job for anybody who's a volunteer, right? So as soon as we create a Kanban board for volunteers, it feels a little like we're getting a little too close to the sun, and that's all I mean. However, we will need basic project management, right? Especially for the, I'm going to make a broad statement here. I don't think we should call them a project manager. I think it should be like a program manager or we got to come up with a better name because project is too specific, and I think it's more programmatic to the way that the mesh works and less about individual projects. But I really like everything else that you're saying. Again, we already have MeshDB, which enables a lot of those processes. We just have to build the other pieces on top of it, right, to connect the dots. I think to what you said, Ash, I think even just lessons learned, what went well, what didn't, is really, really helpful, right? I do want to be careful. My opinion is that like we have to be careful that we don't overdo it and say this person's responsible now for everything. We want them to go back for the last 5 years and document everything that went well, because could they do it? Perhaps. Is it a good use of their time? Probably not, right? So we just have to be a little bit careful. Like there's a long wish list of things that they could do well. I think that if we were to give this role 20 different things that they should be focused on, we're going to get 20 very, very mediocre outputs in 2 years versus maybe 4 or 5 key areas or big project, like long-term projects, some of them being sort of software process focused, some of them being, of course, focused on just working with developers, and then a few other things that we think are the most important from an operational standpoint. That could really get us to the point to where in a year or two, the grant money doesn't even matter anymore, because now we have a good process where volunteers are engaged in a certain way and subcontractors are engaged in a certain way, and at the end of the day, we're reaching low-income residents and more people who want to just join the mesh, right? And want to have alternatives to Comcast. And I think, I'll just sum it all up to say, like, I want to make sure that we're remembering what the mission is, and to me, the mission is like alternatives and options for people. The mission to me is not every New Yorker has NYC Mesh. The mission for me is every New Yorker, or at least many New Yorkers, have alternatives to the one provider that's in their building. Sorry, okay.
I just thought of something out of curiosity. Does the grant specify it needs to be 1 full-time role, or could it be 2 part-time roles? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that.
I don't know how close we have to match exactly the way that it was written. I assume there's some flexibility, but yeah, so what are you thinking?
Yeah, ideally, I do think this should be 1 role, but as we're talking more, it seems like there really are 2 key areas: this technical aspect, being on the ground, software, and then more of the people management, like email, scheduling. Like, if we can find someone who can do both, great, but it might be likely that we can't, so that's why I'm thinking maybe this is 2 part-time roles of people working together. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think we could, I will let you comment. My personal opinion is we should try to find the unicorn, so to speak, right, to start, right? And I personally think like someone who's already involved in the mesh is a perfect example of this. And again, I think that the role could evolve based on that person's capabilities and the things that they're interested in, based on who we select, right? Because again, I think we're going to have a wish list of 10 or 12 or 15 big items, but then we're going to find the right person and say, you know what, you're not good at software, that's okay, because we'll figure that out some other way.
Yeah.
Right, because we're certainly not going to find someone perfect. I think the challenge with 2 part-time people is we now have 2 people to manage. And it sort of leans into my other, and I would love to keep talking about this, but it does lean into my other sort of supervision, reporting structure, and board responsibilities, right? That is something to keep in mind because someone does have to hold that person accountable. And I'm not saying they're going to be screwing around necessarily. I hope that there's someone that cares about this, but there's a, you know, whether it's 2 part-time or full-time, if it's a W-2 employee, there are other requirements that we have to do. I would love to have some sort of career coaching for them. I'd like, they don't have a career with NYC Mesh because it's not exactly, you know, we're not going to have 3 ladders for them to climb, but some ability to say you have some training available, right? Some goals that you should be meeting, and we're going to have to find some way to keep them accountable, right? So if you have 2 employees, it's not 200% harder, but it is more than 100%.
My comment on that is, I think if we think about like where the mesh is lacking right now, like having that technical side is important for like either like helping improve processes and having a perspective on the organization, but the people side is absolutely the place where this person could have the most positive impact on the organization. And so that is where I think we should focus, with the technical part being like a nice to have. I'll also put in the point that like when you're a part-time worker, it's much harder to like really zero in on a project. And so if we hire 2 part-time people, we might just like get to people who aren't able to devote their full attention to the projects that we're giving them.
Yep. Yeah, again, personally, I'm hoping that this pays enough for one person that they don't have to have a second job, or at least, you know, I mean, look, I don't care if someone's got a side gig, but like, ideally, they make enough money to pay their rent and pay for mesh internet, and I'm just kidding, right? But like, and we can give them health insurance and like a real full-time employee, versus, you know, but like, I agree with you 100%, Ash, right? If you hire someone part-time, then they have 1 or 2 other jobs. New York City is one of the most expensive places in the United States to live. And despite all the efforts of, you know, Mondani and others, like that's not going to change tomorrow, right? So.
If you want to go off a little bit of this topic, I agree. I think Brownsville, East New York, strategically, good decision for this. Just out of curiosity, what are our thoughts on the Bronx?
Yes. That's my thought.
Yeah. So this is something I really wanted to discuss because I think we should.
The question was, like, what about the Bronx?
In terms of where we focus our outreach efforts, that makes sense, but I think we should take a like all of the above option for executing this grant, where we say like, this could apply to any low-income building in New York City. Any low-income building in New York City that we come across, let's say, hey, we have this grant. We can get infrastructure set up for free as long as it makes sense for us and them.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm going to make another very broad statement. And I'm okay that's on YouTube right now. 20, 30 minutes ago, I mentioned that we essentially have a balanced budget right now. I would love to find ways to spend our money to do this sort of thing. So even if we don't use grant funding to hook up a building or 5 buildings in the Bronx, I think it would be a good investment, right? Just for the people who are going to receive the service. So there's no reason that the approach, even if ConnectAll and HPD say, no, well, really, it does have to be Brownsville, East New York, that's fine, right? Because the way that we're going to grow from the funding and the role that we get here will, I think, enable us to do a lot more anyway, right? And we have good, consistent revenue streams. We're growing those revenue streams, especially, honestly, in some of these buildings that have been very painful and growing pains for us, but Grand Street's a great example, right? Like, we don't have to worry about Grand Street, you know, turning off their Stripe payment next month, you know what I mean? Because we're providing 300-some people with internet here, right? And that gives us things that we can invest to do, like you say, right? Like, we can find 10 more buildings in the Bronx and be like, you know what, guys? It's not under the grant. This isn't a formal program, but, you know, we're gonna pay for 75% of the infrastructure because you're a nonprofit co-op. right? And then you guys come up with the other 20K, and then, we're going to give you a year of free, whatever it might be, right? I think that those are good ways to spend our money. I'm sorry, not even our money, but the money that people give us, right, that donate to us. Because I don't think, we get a lot of donations, and we're doing things with it, but we're not, it's mostly, honestly, just keeping the lights on is what we're spending our money on right now. And we don't have a lot of major programs of, whether it be a grant or whatever, those sorts of things. And to me, like that's the easiest one to execute because it's things that we're already doing.
Yeah.
Right? It's just that we're just going to say, like, if someone comes to us and, it's not a sleazy developer we don't like, and especially if they're a nonprofit and they just have people who are genuinely in need, great, let's just commit money. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be a positive ROI.
Getting more specific on building selection, I think focusing mostly on like mid-sized buildings at like the 10 to 40 unit range makes a lot of sense. But like focusing out, looking outside of that, we could do like one big project that like kind of hums in the background for the whole 2 years of the grant with like smaller projects going on as well. So like we both have that like a big banner project we can point to where we're installing for a lot of people. It's a kind of Grand Street type deal, while then like spreading out through the neighborhood and like signing these mid-sized buildings up at the same time.
So I think we've covered most of our topics.
On a small note, this is just me putting out there, but we can talk more. I would be interested to know more about the New York Public Library connection. So
Yes.
when you have, we can talk more about that.
That's an
committee.
off YouTube conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can call that a recording.